So if we deep dive into data exploitation first, what we've got, and we've got this actually as a common thread throughout the four pillars, is this idea of a 2x2. And this is how we've defined those three stages that operators may go through. Now, this 2x2 for data is looking at on the y-axis, so from the bottom to the top, the idea of breadth of adoption. Is this something that is intra-domain within a team or within a unit, or is it something that is increasingly cross-domain, so I can use it across my organization and across networks, OSS, BSS, IT, etc. And on the x-axis, we think about technical maturity. How advanced is the capability that we're deploying, from more basic observation and cataloging in terms of data to then more AI and ML-driven tools and insights. Step one, we feel like for operators, which was echoed by pretty much all 20 that we spoke to and then echoed again in the survey, was that the first step for data is to strive towards a common data model. And what I want to emphasize here, and we'll emphasize again on the next slide, is that this is not a data warehouse. This is not classic big data. It isn't just about storing everything that you can in a big centralized repository. It's about thinking about the governance around data. It's about thinking, how can I make sure that data from different vendors is cataloged or referenced in a similar way? How can I make sure that I got the context around the data to make it useful? And step one is we feel like you may do that intra-domain. So you'll start small. You'll start thinking about your network data or your access network data and thinking about how you can start to build up a more common data model or a common data culture around that. And that will obviously drive basic business intelligence within your team, but will also start to drive more observability of data from other departments. So you can start to at least understand what's going on with data from other areas and start to think about your own common data fabric or data mesh, as some people call it. The second step then we see is moving in more into that cross-domain bucket. So of course, starting to bring in some level of advanced tools, but thinking about, okay, I've got my common data model. How can I refine that now? Step two is refining that common data model such that data from other teams can now be observed and utilized in a more automated way in your basic data intelligence work and in your data analyst work. So this data now sits under a refined model. And when in stage two, you as a user can access it in right time, in real time, and you can generally access that through more automated dashboards that report and show a single view, I suppose, of those data sets. And again, becoming increasingly important as we do move towards more multi-vendor stacks, making sure that data from Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei is cataloged in a similar way. And even though they may have three different languages, you can use them with similar context. So I think a part of that refined data model becomes increasingly important as we move towards more open networking. And the next step then, the final step, is a big jump to start leveraging more AI and ML tools. So rather than investing a lot of effort and time in trying to bring more advanced tools to data that isn't well engineered, what we suggest is that this is the final step. So you start to now bring data analysts and scientists into the commonplace recruitment processes, rather than them having to do heavy data engineering tasks. You start to leverage AI and ML tools to drive towards new insights that maybe wouldn't have been achieved by humans before, and away from basic business intelligence. And now we think that the data is well governed. There's good data management structures in place. You can start to think about how to monetize externally, because it's difficult for telcos to start to think about external monetization until they've practiced what they preach, I suppose. If you have good data protocols internally, you can think about monetizing that externally. So those are the three steps through the program that we defined around data exploitation, from building the common data model to refining that with a cross-domain flavor, to then thinking about how you leverage more AI and ML tools that are emerging. And what we wanted to do through the survey was kind of plot, where do telcos self-reflect that they are? So this wasn't our value judgment. This was very much based on where telcos, through a kind of iterative process, would consider themselves placed on this maturity framework. And as you can see, around 50%, just over half, consider themselves more towards bucket one. And again, this is a spectrum. It's not that you suddenly hit this milestone one and then you hit milestone two. Of course, there are capabilities that overlap here, but generally 50% of operators considering themselves towards bucket one, with just shy of a third then moving towards actually refining this data model across their teams, starting to think about how data can be observable and used with different organizations or units. and then 20% actually saying, well, yeah, we think we've got a lot of that data work done. We've moved fast in data. Players like Telefonica, for example, that have been investing in their data management capabilities for kind of over 10 years now, thinking about not just data lakes, but instead this common data fabric and where does data need to reside locally versus not. And they're now leveraging that investment to think about how they monetize externally and bring in some of those new emerging tools and the hype around AI and ML. So in terms of the recommendations, at a general level, because most of the operators that we've surveyed here are sitting more towards stages 1 and 2, we do think an investment priority should be for operators that don't have the common data model. So thinking about data in a more common framework and with common terminology across teams. And again, emphasis that this is not a data warehouse. This is thinking about the governance and thinking about the secure and right time access. And of course, as we'll come on to later on in more detail, having a good data management capability is not just the foundation for external monetization of data, but actually a strong foundation for what we'll see in terms of automation and exposure. So it becomes quite a foundational piece on top of which you drive future automation. And the last thing I wanted to touch on with this slide is we had a stat recently from one of the network equipment providers that we were speaking to that was saying by going through this relatively difficult process with an operator of cataloging data under this common refined data model, they've now managed to reduce the time on data scientists and data analysts that they do engineering work by 70%. So if we think about data skills split by kind of those in more ML and AI ops, those in more data engineering, and then those that provide reporting and visualization, actual analytics and value to scientists and the analysts, 70% of the time now going to data engineering for the telco, you can drastically reduce that and shift more of the focus to analysts. And I think that will help you retain talent or acquire talent, which I know is an issue for some operators at the moment. How do we keep tier one data analytics skills when all of them want to go to the hyperscalers? Well, I think having a lot of this data engineering work done so they've got a solid foundation to use themselves will be key, because you'll reduce all of the hassle that they need to go through in engineering as well.